If you were walking down a city street and saw a man being thrown to the pavement by police, would you stop? Would you pull out your phone, record, speak, or would you just walk away? Before this story begins, take a second, because what you're about to hear might change how you see people forever. And hey, if you believe that every person deserves dignity, no matter what they look like or where they come from, hit that subscribe button, because stories like this are why we speak up. The wind was cold that morning, pushing scraps of newspaper along the cracked sidewalks of downtown Atlanta. Cars rushed by, honking, splashing puddles onto the curb where a man sat with his back against a graffiti-stained wall. His name was Malcolm Tate, 52 years old, black, once a father, once a mechanic, now a man most people didn't even see. He had a weather-beaten duffel bag beside him, the last of his belongings, an old photo, a wrench he'd kept for luck, and a Bible with the cover torn off. He'd been homeless for 3 years, living mostly around the same block near Peachtree Street where the buses rolled in. To strangers, he was invisible. Across the street, through tinted glass on the 22nd floor of the Horizon building, Julian Pierce was watching. Julian was a name people in the city knew, the youngest black CEO of a logistics company that had risen to national recognition. His office looked out over the same streets he grew up on. On his desk sat awards, deals worth millions, and a framed picture of his late mother who used to scrub floors 2 blocks from where Malcolm now sat. Sometimes, when the pressure of board meetings and investors grew too much, Julian would stand at that window just to remind himself where he came from. He didn't know Malcolm yet, but fate was preparing a meeting that would test everything he believed about success, justice, and brotherhood. That day, Malcolm had just finished helping an elderly woman carry her groceries to a bus stop. She'd handed him $5 and thanked him with a smile that felt like sunlight. He tucked the money away carefully, thinking maybe he'd get a hot meal later. Then came the commotion sirens wailing, tires screeching. A jewelry store down the block had just been robbed. 2 men in black hoodies ran through the crowd, knocking people over. Malcolm froze, trying to stay out of the way. The men disappeared around the corner, but when the police arrived, chaos turned toward the wrong man. "Hey, you, on the ground!" An officer shouted. Malcolm turned, confused, hands raised, but before he could speak, he was slammed onto the pavement, the duffel bag kicked aside. He cried out, "I didn't do nothing, man. I didn't do nothing." But no one listened. The crowd gathered, whispering, filming. The same people who ignored him daily now pointed cameras, capturing the humiliation of a man who'd already lost almost everything. From his office window, Julian saw the flashing lights below. Something about it pulled him closer. He grabbed his phone and zoomed in. The man on the ground wasn't resisting. He looked broken, pleading. Julian felt his stomach twist. He'd seen that expression before on his uncle, years ago, when police accused him of theft he didn't commit. Julian had promised himself then that he'd never let injustice slide if he had power to stop it. He picked up his jacket, told his assistant to cancel his meeting, and took the elevator down. On the street, Malcolm's wrists were being cuffed. A shop owner pointed at him, saying he looked like the suspect. One of the real thieves had dropped a cheap black hoodie near the alley, and somehow that became evidence enough. "We found the suspect's clothing," an officer said. "Fits the description." Malcolm's voice trembled. "I didn't steal nothing, I swear to God." Julian stepped forward. "Excuse me, officer." His tone was calm but carried weight. The officers turned, recognizing the man whose company donated to city programs and whose face had been on the news. "Is there a problem here?" Julian asked. "Because from where I stand, that man doesn't look like he's done anything." One cop muttered something about procedure. Julian said quietly, "Then do it right. Check your footage. There are cameras everywhere." He gestured toward the streetlights, the jewelry store, the ATM, each with security feeds that could tell the truth. Malcolm looked up, eyes watery, not believing someone was defending him. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. But the police, wary of interference, put Malcolm in the cruiser anyway. Julian took out his phone and started filming. "This man is being arrested without evidence," he said clearly. "My name is Julian Pierce, and I'll be following this case. the crowd murmured. Someone recognized the CEO's voice. In minutes, the moment hit social media. Hours later, Julian sat in his office replaying the footage. He couldn't shake the image of Malcolm's face pressed against the car window. Something deep in his chest ached, a mix of anger and responsibility. He called his legal team. "Find out who that man is," he said. "I want him represented." Meanwhile, Malcolm sat in a holding cell that smelled of bleach and despair. He stared at the concrete floor, wondering how he'd ended up here again, because this wasn't the first time life had mistaken him for something he wasn't. He'd once been proud, running a small auto shop until a bad partner and worse luck left him bankrupt. His wife had died soon after. Then came eviction, one missed opportunity after another. He'd fought to stay afloat until the city swallowed him. Now, here he was, accused of robbing a store he couldn't even afford to step into. When the detective came, the questioning was sharp, dismissive. "You were near the scene." "You fit the description," Malcolm said. "You mean I'm black and poor?" The detective didn't answer. They showed him grainy footage, 2 men in hoodies running. None looked like him, but it didn't seem to matter. Back in his high-rise, Julian's assistant brought in updates. Malcolm Tate, no priors, ex-mechanic, homeless for 3 years. "Should I move on, sir?" she asked. Julian shook his head. "No, I want to meet him." Something about Malcolm's quiet dignity under humiliation struck him deeply. It reminded him of the night his own father was stopped for driving suspiciously in his own car, one that never quite healed. The next morning, Julian went to the precinct. The officer on duty raised an eyebrow as the suited businessman walked in. "I'm here for Malcolm Tate," Julian said. The sergeant hesitated, then waved him through. Inside, Malcolm sat hunched at a metal table. When Julian entered, Malcolm looked up warily. "Mr. Tate," Julian said gently, "my name is Julian Pierce. I saw what happened." "I believe you," Malcolm blinked, unsure if this was real. "You don't even know me," he murmured. Julian replied, "I don't need to. I know what injustice looks like." And in that instant, something unspoken passed between them. One man at the top, one at the bottom, both shaped by the same world that measured worth by appearance. Julian arranged for bail, paid from his own pocket. Reporters swarmed outside as Malcolm stepped free, blinking against the daylight. The story was already trending. Homeless man wrongfully arrested, CEO steps in. But what neither of them knew was that this act of compassion would uncover something far darker than a simple arrest. The robbery had roots stretching into corruption, falsified reports, and a conspiracy that reached into the city's very institutions. And before it was over, both men would risk everything, their safety, reputations, and freedom for truth. That night, Julian offered Malcolm a hotel room, food, and clean clothes. Malcolm hesitated, pride fighting gratitude, but hunger won. He ate slowly, as if afraid the meal might vanish. Julian sat across, studying him. "What happened to you, Malcolm?" he asked. And Malcolm told him about the shop, the debts, the loss, the nights sleeping under bridges. Julian listened, silent. Then Malcolm said quietly, "They don't see us, man. They just see what they're scared of." Julian nodded. "Then we'll make them see." Outside, the city lights flickered like stars fallen to earth. Inside that room, 2 men from opposite worlds shared a moment of truth that would soon shake the whole city. And as the cameras rolled and the hashtags spread, a storm was brewing, one that would test the meaning of justice, race, and humanity itself. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds of the modest hotel room, falling across Malcolm's face. For the first time in years, he woke to the smell of coffee instead of exhaust fumes. The sheets were clean, the air warm, and yet his body still flinched, half expecting someone to shout at him to move. When he sat up, he noticed a neatly folded suit on the chair beside the bed with a note attached. "Wear this." "You've got a meeting," JP, his heart pounded. He didn't own a suit anymore. The last one had been pawned long ago. He touched the fabric like it might vanish, then washed up, trimmed his beard in the mirror, and stared at himself. Beneath the lines of hardship, there was still a man who once had purpose. Downstairs, Julian was waiting with 2 coffees. "Morning," he said, smiling. "How do you take it?" Malcolm hesitated, unused to being asked such simple courtesy. "Black," he replied, and Julian grinned. "Good answer." They stepped out into the city. Reporters had caught wind of their story, cameras flashing as they exited the hotel. Julian put a hand on Malcolm's shoulder and said quietly, "Don't let them turn you into a spectacle. You're not their headline, you're a human being." They rode in Julian's car, the kind of sleek black sedan that seemed to glide above the road. Malcolm gazed out the window, watching the streets he'd slept on rush past. "Feels strange," he said softly. "Seeing the world from this side of the glass," Julian nodded. "I know, but remember where you sit doesn't define who you are." Their destination was Julian's office, where his legal team had gathered around a long glass table. Malcolm looked small in the expensive room, surrounded by polished wood and chrome. Julian introduced him. "This is Mr. Tate. He's my guest, and the reason we're all here." The attorneys exchanged quick glances, but Julian's tone left no room for doubt. This wasn't charity, it was justice. The lead lawyer, a sharp woman named Clara Vaughn, spoke first. "We've reviewed the police report. There are inconsistencies. No physical evidence ties Mr. Tate to the robbery, and the witness descriptions don't match." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, timelines, and surveillance stills. One image froze Malcolm in time, being thrown to the ground. He couldn't look at it long. "They saw a man, not the truth," he whispered. Clara nodded. "We'll fix that." Julian leaned back, eyes hard. "We're filing for a full investigation. If this is systemic, I want names." Outside that office, the city was already buzzing. News outlets called Julian a hero, though he brushed it off. "I'm not a hero," he told one reporter. "I'm a man who refuses to look away." Still, not everyone was pleased. Anonymous messages began to flood his company inbox, accusations of race baiting, threats to boycott his brand. Investors called, nervous about public controversy, but Julian didn't back down. "If my company can't stand for what's right, then it stands for nothing." For Malcolm, freedom came with its own kind of prison. Everywhere he went, people stared. Some offered help. Others muttered insults under their breath. A man at a bus stop sneered, "You're that bum from TV." Malcolm clenched his fists but walked away. That night, he sat in his hotel room staring out at the skyline, wondering why being innocent still felt like punishment. Julian called to check on him. "You okay?" he asked. Malcolm hesitated. "I don't know. Part of me feels grateful. Part of me feels angry. They took everything from me, and now I'm just a story." Julian was silent for a long time, then said, "Then let's rewrite the ending." The next day, they met at the courthouse. Clara had arranged for the surveillance footage from the jewelry store and surrounding cameras to be reviewed. The truth was there, hidden in the angles no one bothered to check. One clip showed the real thieves, a pair of younger men jumping into a car minutes before the arrest. The timestamps proved Malcolm was blocks away at the time, helping the old woman with her groceries. When the footage played, the courtroom murmured. The prosecutor looked pale. The judge turned to the police representative and asked sharply, "Why wasn't this reviewed before the arrest?" No one had a good answer. Within hours, the charges were dismissed. Malcolm was free, officially and publicly. But instead of joy, he felt numb. "They can clear my name on paper," he said quietly, "but they can't erase how people looked at me." After the hearing, Julian invited Malcolm to lunch at a quiet restaurant by the park. "What will you do now?" he asked. Malcolm shrugged. "Don't know. Maybe find work again. But who's going to hire a man everyone's seen in handcuffs?" Julian tapped his chin, thinking, "You ever fix cars?" Malcolm looked up. "All my life." That's when Julian smiled. "I've got an idea," within weeks. Julian used his connections to open a new initiative, a training center for homeless and formerly incarcerated individuals, teaching trade skills and offering employment through his company's vehicle division. He called it Project Phoenix. The first hire? Malcolm Tate. Malcolm worked hard, earning respect from the younger trainees. He taught them not just how to turn a wrench, but how to hold their heads high. The program grew, drawing national attention. People began to see Malcolm not as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience. But as the spotlight brightened, shadows deepened. One night, Julian received a call from Clara. Her voice was tense. "Julian, you need to see this." She sent over internal police documents, redacted files, reports that shouldn't have existed. The arresting officer had falsified evidence not once but multiple times in similar cases, all targeting homeless black men. There were payoffs, closed cases, and even connections to the jewelry store owner who had filed the false report. Julian's blood ran cold. "This isn't incompetence," he said. "It's a racket." Clara nodded grimly. "And if you go after them, they'll come after you." Julian hung up, staring out his window at the glowing city below. He'd built everything from the ground up, but none of it mattered if corruption could crush lives so easily. He called Malcolm. "We've got a fight on our hands," he said. Malcolm didn't hesitate. "Then let's fight." The next morning, the headlines exploded again. CEO exposes police corruption tied to wrongful arrests. The city erupted. Protests filled the streets, voices chanting for justice, holding signs with Malcolm's face. The mayor called for an internal investigation. The police union hit back, calling Julian's claims defamatory. Death threats poured in, but so did letters of support from people across the country. One night, as Malcolm locked up the garage at Project Phoenix, a car rolled by slow. Its windows were tinted, engine humming low. He felt the hairs rise on his neck. Then, the sound of glass shattering his shop window blown out. Someone had thrown a brick with a note attached. "Stop digging or next time it has you." Malcolm called Julian immediately. Within minutes, Julian was there, police lights flashing again, but this time for protection. "They're scared," Julian said. "That means we're close." As the days passed, tension built like a storm cloud ready to burst. Julian's company board demanded he drop the crusade. "It's not your fight," one executive said. Julian's jaw tightened. "It's every man's fight." The board threatened to remove him as CEO if he continued. That night, Julian sat alone in his office, staring at his mother's photo. He remembered her words, "Never climb so high that you forget to lift someone else." He picked up the phone and called Clara. "File the lawsuit," he said. "Even if it costs me everything." Meanwhile, Malcolm wrestled with his own doubts. He didn't want anyone else hurt because of him. "Maybe I should disappear," he told Julian. "Go back to the streets." "Let them win." Julian shook his head. "You don't hide from truth. You stand in it, but truth had a price." The deeper they dug, the uglier it got. Records of planted evidence, coerced confessions, cover-ups going back years. And at the center of it all was someone unexpected. The police chief himself, once a hero, now a man with too much to lose. When Clara presented the findings to the district attorney, the DAO whispered, "You realize you're about to bring down half the department?" Clara replied, "Then maybe it's time it fell." The night before the case went public, Malcolm stood outside the shop, looking at the city lights reflecting in the broken glass of the window that had been shattered. He thought of all the nights he'd watched those same lights from the sidewalk, wishing someone would see him. Now, the whole world saw him, but not as he expected. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was the face of a movement he never asked for. Julian joined him, silent for a moment. Then he said softly, "You know, sometimes change doesn't come gently. Sometimes it roars." Malcolm nodded. "Then let it roar." And as the city braced for the storm their truth would unleash, two men, one rich, one poor, stood side by side, knowing that what they'd started could burn down everything they knew. But maybe, just maybe, that fire was exactly what was needed to light the way.